Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I am delighted to welcome my guest today, Caroline Pover, who is an award-winning author, entrepreneur and philanthropist. But what brings her here today is the topic of vaccine injury or adverse reaction, which has affected significant numbers of people, but it's a topic which is often brushed under the carpet somewhat. So there's loads to dive into today. A very warm welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So it is really cool to have you here. Would you mind maybe just saying a little bit more about yourself and what life was like before you came unwell?
Oh, I was always on the go. I've always been like that my whole life, been really active person, fairly healthy. Actually, at the time before I got sick, I was actually incredibly healthy. I was running most days, doing yoga most days, working, very active, probably 14 hours on my feet. I have a food business, and I was very active in it. I didn't sit in front of a computer very often, probably opened up the computer maybe once or twice a month. And yeah, just really very, very active person. I'd probably describe it as just a very active life before I got sick. And then literally overnight, just completely debilitated and never recovered.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I mean, I guess, one of the obvious things to do is to draw parallels between the vaccine injury and long COVID. And, that's probably sensible in a lot of ways. But the story with people with long COVID seems to be a sort of slower progression from initial illness of the virus in whatever form that took, which sort of progressed into long COVID in some form. But with the vaccine injury, it seems to be much more of a sort of flicking of a switch almost. Is that how it was for you?
Yeah, it's quite violent actually. So I had the injection at 12:20, and exactly 9 hours later, I started shaking, and it just progressed within hours. Then the paramedics were here and I was off in an ambulance to A&E. So it was very quick. It happened very quickly. It doesn't always happen that way, actually. Some people, it does happen a little bit more slowly, a bit like your situation. But for quite a few of us, it does happen just very quickly. It was a bit like a switch just going on, actually, thinking about it now. It's a good way to describe it. And I was diagnosed straight away. In fact, the paramedics, as soon as they were here in the house before I even got to hospital, they said it was, so right from the beginning, there was never any question that it was vaccine related.
Right, yes, because I guess with it being so sort of immediate, it was a lot more obvious. Whereas if it had been something that had maybe come on over days, weeks, months even, it might be harder to pinpoint or be believed that that's what it was.
I think the question is about whether it's believed or not. If something happens gradually, if it happens on the day that you're vaccinated, then it would be a reasonable thing to look at. But what's interesting is that if people got sick after having COVID, there's often been questions about, well, have you had COVID?
Did you get your positive test?
Right. Whereas with the vaccine injured community, there has been a huge reluctance to look at whether it was related to the vaccine. Whereas if it had been COVID, then okay, let's blame it on that. But if it's the vaccine, then it's not okay to blame it on that. It's been a very odd world to be in, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, I have experience of long COVID, obviously don't have experience of the vaccine injury side of it. And what I've noticed from my own experiences, and probably more from hearing from other people's experiences, is this kind of disbelief. Oh, well, were you not like that before? Or how can you know that it was COVID? And how can you even know that you had COVID? Because, many people didn't get a positive test, especially early on. But it seems almost like the vaccine injury side of this is that plus.
It's hard to explain, actually. I've been quite lucky. So my GP is supportive. The vast majority of the medical professionals that I've seen right from the beginning have been very supportive. My family are, and most of my friends are, but I'm in the minority. I think most people who have become very unwell after having the vaccine, they have not had that level of support. And I've had people who have been very unkind as well. It's just that I tend to focus on the people who've been kinder to me. But I've had people cross over the street because I'm quite public about it and quite vocal about it. I like to think not in an angry way. But even so, even if you're just talking about vaccine injury, people are really uncomfortable with it at all. I've had people take steps away from me when I've said to them, they say, I haven't seen you for a long time. And say, oh, well, actually, I've been really poorly. And said, oh, is it COVID? That's always the first thing people say. I said, no. And I always have to say the words like, I was diagnosed with an adverse reaction, because if you don't say that you're actually diagnosed with it, people will then accuse you of making things up. So no, I was diagnosed with an adverse reaction to, in my case, it was AstraZeneca. And I've had people literally take steps away from me. And these are people I've known for years. And you think, well, you can't catch an adverse reaction. You're not going to get it just by talking to me about it now. But people are that uncomfortable. When I've given speeches, actually, sometimes I have people say they know people who think they've got long COVID, but they think they've had an adverse reaction to a vaccine. But because it's much easier for people to accept, perhaps, that they have long COVID. I'm not saying they do or they don't. I'm just saying these are things that are said to me. So people say to me, how do I convince them that actually what they're dealing with is an adverse reaction to the vaccine? And I say, so why do you need to convince them of whatever? It doesn't matter. If they are dealing with the same symptoms, they need help. And if you think you've got long COVID and you need help, you will probably be treated more kindly than if you say you have an adverse reaction to vaccine anyway. So I say to people, just let people think that they have long COVID. I don't think either way. I'm just saying that there are people who they want to convince you, people like you, that what you have is not correct. But it doesn't matter. You need help. And you need kindness and you need sympathy. You will get more of that if you say you have long COVID. I often said, I wish I'd had long COVID rather than vaccine injury. Vaccine injury is a horrible world to live in, horrible. You see, I think, the worst in humanity, the way that people talk about vaccines, about any kind of pharmaceutical harm. People are incredibly unpleasant about it and they just don't want to know. And the fact is, if we're going to have any kind of pharmaceuticals, then there will always be adverse reactions and somebody's going to have to deal with them. So if you want to be incredibly pro-vaccine, you also need to have the balls to face up to the fact that some people are harmed by them.
It's quite interesting. Again, we're coming at this, the two of us, from two sort of, I don't know if we're under the same umbrella, but we're, on two different sides of a sort of similar coin anyway, where you're coming at this from the vaccine injured side and I'm coming at it from having long COVID. And from my experience and having spoken to other people, that someone could wish that they had long COVID rather than the vaccine injury seems like a really strange thing to say, because from what I've experienced and from what I know other people have experienced. So I suppose that kind of highlights, how difficult it is to get help for long COVID for certain people, that actually for you guys, you have it even worse than we do. I mean, there's a huge amount of gaslighting that goes on with long COVID. And, and it's not everybody. Like you, I've had quite supportive doctors. They may not have been particularly helpful, but they've certainly not told me that I'm making it up or, or anything like that. But there are lots of people that haven't had that level of support. So the idea that there could be like a group of people that have it even worse than that is kind of a bit eye-opening, really, I think.
I know. Nobody should be treated like that, whether it's long COVID or vaccine injury or anything. And whether we have similar symptoms or not, I think that we do have very similar symptoms, but it shouldn't matter. The fact is that some people are really sick. They used to live life and now they can't. And it almost doesn't matter what's brought that about. The fact is that they need support. Our communities need medical support. We need emotional support, and in some cases, financial support. And all of us need that. And humanity in general should just be a bit kinder to anybody who has any kind of complicated chronic health condition. The ME communities, there's been people who've been battling the way that we are. There have been people who've been battling like this for years and years and years and haven't had any support. So we need to change how we behave towards people who have these kinds of illnesses.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that is one of my kind of hopes of a silver lining to come out of this, is that there will be a greater understanding and more support for all chronic conditions, because the thought that people have been suffering like this and worse for decades is just unthinkable, isn't it? It was unthinkable to me before I got ill, and even now it's still unthinkable to me. But it's an interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, you were saying earlier about pharmaceuticals, and if we have these things, that we need to be aware of the fact that there is going to be a flip side to it, that some people are going to be adversely affected. That has been with the vaccines, but I'm sure it is also true with other pharmaceuticals. I mean, we throw the packets away on the paracetamol, don't we, without reading them, but they're full of 1 in a million could have such and such a reaction. We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us.
And I think we've got people who I assume are also affected by long COVID. I know we definitely do in the vaccine injury community. We have people who this is not the first time in their lives where they've had to deal with a major health issue. I know that we have people who have a history of ME, but their health is manageable. They lived a very fulfilling life and they were encouraged to get vaccinated, saying that because they were vulnerable and because they had ME, then they needed to get vaccinated. And then they found that their condition was far, far worse than it ever was before. So that's something I think that my heart goes out to people like that who, they've spent years struggling with their health anyway. They've managed to get it into a situation where they can manage their health challenges, and then suddenly it's far, far worse than it ever has been. I can't imagine what it must be like.
Yeah, I guess it's like climbing out of the hole and then sort of falling back down it, or falling down a different one, isn't it? And I find that you get these kind of ups and downs with long COVID, and it seems to be a thing that's kind of mirrored for you. Each time you kind of climb to the top of a peak and you think, maybe this is the time, and then something will happen and you'll go back down the roller coaster again, and the next time you climb out, it's like, oh, maybe this is the one. And then after that's happened a few times, you just start to lose hope. And that's even worse sometimes, to lose that hope. But, it's like when you're repeatedly thrown down holes time after time, what do you expect?
So that's quite interesting. That whole idea then about, oh, maybe this is the time. So what you mean is maybe this is the time I'm fixed. How many times did you do that?
Oh, I don't know. Lots and lots and lots. And to start with, you have that kind of hope, don't you? Well, I certainly did. It was kind of where I thought, right, well, this is temporary. This is maybe going to take a whole month to get better. Gosh, that sounds awful, but at least in a month's time, this will be over. So as you start feeling slightly better around about that time, and you think, okay, right, well, that's cool, this is over. And then, oh gosh, that didn't work. Okay, well, now someone's saying maybe it'll take 3 months. That sounds terrible, but okay, well, at least I've got an end in sight now. And then as the time gets pushed further and further and further back, it's like keep having that hope. It sort of gets pushed down a little bit as time goes on. And it's only really been in the last maybe 6 months where I've started to get it back. And I think when you lose that hope, it can be quite a dark place to go into. But it's understandable, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really interesting because I wouldn't describe myself as having had hope at all. This is quite interesting. So I don't believe in false hope. And while I've been quite public about everything, I've not been the kind of person who said, we're going to get better, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, because it's just not there. And the end of my book, I wrote a section about acceptance. I think acceptance is a huge part of learning to live with this. And I think that there's been a lot of kind of spiritual, philosophical conversations I've had to have with myself and with other people too, about accepting that I may not get better and this may be it. And how do I live with that? How do I reconcile what was an incredibly active, busy, productive life with who I am now, and who is that person then who made the most out of every moment, and who is this person now who can't make the most out of it? Well, still, I will still try to make the most of the moments, but I don't have those moments now. I don't have very many of them. So it's a very different kind of life that I'm looking at. And, I've had conversations with people who are important to me. And that, to me, didn't feel like something I was afraid of. It was something that was part of accepting what had happened. It made me feel more peaceful, having those kinds of conversations and facing those kinds of things. Having said that, I'm 51 and I've lived quite a wild and crazy life. And I've always said I can go at any time because I've lived an incredibly full life. I've done everything I've ever wanted to do. And generally, I think I've been a good person. I think, when you look back on your time on the planet, then you think, have I done more good than bad? And nobody's perfect, of course, but I think on the whole, I can look back and think, oh, actually, yeah, that was quite a good life. I'm happy about that. So I've had to have those kinds of conversations and those thoughts, and that is easier to do when you're 51. That's been a big part of how I've coped with a lot of this. Is there's a lot of acceptance going on. So I haven't gone through those periods where I've thought, oh, I'm going to be better, I'm going to be this. I've just kind of accepted this is the way everything is. And I've found everything much, much easier when I've stopped fighting. Much easier.
I think the word acceptance, it's not a word that I like. It was something that I railed against really, really hard to start with. It's something that people say to you, isn't it? You've got to find acceptance with your situation or whatever. And I was just like, no, I will not accept that this is me for good. I just cannot accept that.
It's not about accepting you for good. It's about accepting today. So this is what it is today. I used to get a lot of emails from people saying, I worry about this, I'm afraid of this, I'm those kinds of emotions. And that they're all to do with thinking about things in a year's time, in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time, what their life's going to be like. It's like, no, just bring it back to just right now. That's all.
Yeah, exactly. It was when I kind of stopped fighting against it and realized that acceptance didn't have to mean that this was forever, but it did mean that this is today. So today, if I don't wake up feeling that great, then no, I'm not going to go for a run, because that would be stupid. Today, I'm having a rest day, and that is okay. And I'm much more okay with that now. Yeah, it's certainly something that at the start I was just like, nope, 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 we're not going there. And then it was kind of over time where I kind of realized that, yeah, if you accept things for the moment, then actually you stop fighting against things. And then actually that helps. You're not constantly, I mean, you get the peaks and the troughs anyway, but emotionally, maybe not quite so much. And because, peaks and troughs emotionally is exhausting on top of everything else, isn't it? I'd be interested in talking about kind of the symptoms. I mean, you have your own experiences of this, but you are, in contact with a lot of others as well through the community. And there's, I think, a fair amount of crossover in symptoms between long COVID and the vaccine injured. But are there certain symptoms that tend to be more one side than the other? What's the kind of things to look out for there?
We did a survey of our group, UKCV family, to look at the symptoms. I wanted to make sure that we covered everything. The number of symptoms were ridiculous. And these people don't just have one or two of these symptoms. They have 20, 30, 40, up to 100. And these are the categories that they're under. Neurological symptoms. We have skin and hair symptoms. There are vision and eye related symptoms, ear, nose and throat, cardiovascular, gastrointestinal, sensory, lots of numbness and pins and needles and odd sensations, muscular spasms and things, hormonal, gynecological. There's a lot of menstrual problems. And then there's immune system issues, nervous system, bladder issues, energy levels. That's the one everybody knows about. Lots of blood and circulation problems, breathing difficulties, sleep issues, and psychological issues. And under each of those categories, there's probably about 15, 20 different symptoms under each one at least.
So that is very interesting, because I think everything you've just mentioned is also a long COVID symptom. And as you say, people have, lots of different symptoms and they can move around and change and fluctuate. So that seems to be the same as well.
Yeah, I think my understanding is that there's some very similar issues going on there that are bringing about very similar symptoms.
Yeah, I mean, I keep saying it's really interesting. I mean, it is interesting, but it's also like, I wish it wasn't happening. I don't know if you find the same thing, but I do quite a lot of where I'll start looking into a certain symptom or a certain kind of avenue, and I'll just get kind of swept up in this. Wow, that's fascinating. That's amazing. That can happen. And then I take a step back and I'm just like, yeah, that's literally happening to me, and it really sucks. But it can be very interesting.
I did used to in the early days, I think, but once I started, I think, being so public about it, I felt really overwhelmed with people sending information. And still now, I think most days I get an email or something from somebody who says, have you seen this? Or, sends one article or another. And some of the articles are quite frightening, actually. We get these things all the time in the vaccine injury community. And you think, why are you sending this to people like us? You don't send things to cancer patients and say you're all going to die, do you? So I find that all of that a little bit odd. But I don't delve too much into it because I think there's so many things that are unknown, and I'm not entirely sure how much time sitting in front of a computer is helpful for our health. And I'm a bit more, I think, solution focused. So my pattern, I suppose, has been I would look at one symptom and throw everything I could at that. So, for example, at one point, I had this is quite in the early months actually, an ear and jaw issue. So I just did everything I could to try and alleviate that through all sorts of natural means, and would throw as much as I could at that. And then it cleared up. Okay, well, what's the next symptom that I want to deal with? And I post these on my social media. I make these kind of charts, and I like a 1-page A4 sheet that I put on the fridge that's all nutrition focused, or recently I've learned about essential oils, so I'll put specific essential oils in there. I've just done a new chart just a couple of days ago, actually, that's related to copper deficiency and the lymphatic system. So 2 different things I've got going on. So I'm looking at those. So I'm going to put all my energy into that. So I tend to, and I have done this from the beginning, I think, I tend to be very much solution focused. So I don't need to necessarily understand lots of things behind why this damage has happened, but I do want to understand what can help me feel better. And I'm happy to try all sorts of different things. There's a lot of trial and error going on.
I spoke with someone recently who put into words something that I've been doing, but just didn't have the words for it. And she described it as making recovery your project. And I was like, oh, that's the word. That's the word that I have been looking for. And it's exactly it, isn't it? It's like, right, breathlessness. What can I do about that? So then you try things, don't you? And you think, right, okay, now that's started to clear up. Right, what's next? And you go through things, and then things will flare up, and you'll have to kind of bat them down again, like smoldering fires. But this idea of working your way through things, and making recovery your project.
And not being overwhelmed. People get really overwhelmed because there are so many symptoms to deal with. Then don't try to deal with all of them in one go. Just take one thing, and don't spend your entire time thinking about it either. Just, okay, I'm going to put a little bit of energy towards that, and just focus one thing at a time.
Yeah, definitely. And something that I've had to learn, because my personality has always been, I need to do everything all at the same time right now, and if it doesn't work first time, then it's a complete failure, and that's terrible. And that has always kind of been my thing. That's how I've always been. And it's kind of been like with this, it's like, oh, okay, I've had to completely try to switch that off and make this a longer game, and having to really try to be kind to myself when things don't work straight away, or maybe they do start working, but then you have a flare up of something else, and that is okay, and that is just the way things are. And fighting against it, as we were saying earlier, actually doesn't help. But it's had to be quite a big kind of switch for me, which is probably a good thing, because living in that kind of everything has to happen right now straight away kind of thing is probably not that healthy. But it was a very big change for me, certainly.
I think there's a lot of us, we talk about this a lot in the Vaccine Ninja community, actually. There's a lot of people who were overachievers before. I always describe myself, I used to be a very annoying overachiever. And there's lots of us who are like that. We talk about this a lot, people who have had incredibly active lives beforehand. And we've all had to completely change the way that we navigate life with this. And maybe we, the people who are more active in support groups, I don't know. Or is it that there's a certain personality type that long COVID and the adverse reactions are affecting?
We'll be right back. Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much. Yeah, I would say it does seem to be that way. Again, there's no actual data on that, but anecdotally that does seem to be a bit of a pattern.
And with Chinese medicine, then my understanding is that people who have those kinds of personalities and very active people would be, I think it's to do with kidney energy. I don't know a lot about it, but it might be something maybe some of your listeners might know more about and might be interested in looking at it. But it's to do with certain personalities. We're depleting kidney energy, and that's what long COVID and adverse reactions seem to have affected people who have weak kidney energy. And I know definitely one of my first symptoms that I dealt with, I had quite severe problems with my kidneys very early on. And kidney issues, that is something that keeps coming up in conversations. And this is, it depends what kind of healthcare system you're interested in, or whatever works for you. But if people want to look into Chinese medicine, then I am told we should be looking at the kidney energy, because that's the energy that people like you and that's the energy that we use a lot of.
That is very interesting. So I would love to know, maybe, I don't know if you've got a top 3 or something, the things that you've found that have helped.
The things that work for me are quite controversial, and I get a bit of stick online for the things that I do, but without a doubt, these have been lifesavers for me. So the number one thing for me has been, let's call it therapeutic phlebotomy. So I accidentally discovered this 5 months after being vaccinated. And my GP wanted to have a whole load of tests done to get to the bottom of what might be going on. So I had rather a lot of blood taken. And after having those blood tests taken, I felt like a different person. I felt like I was lighter, brighter, cleaner. It was literally like I'd been cleaned out. And I thought it was just a coincidence. I didn't really take it very seriously. I made some joke at the time about it, medieval bloodletting or something. And then I had a little bit of time where I was functioning, and then I started deteriorating again quite badly. And the only thing I could think of trying was, I'll see if I can get some blood taken out and just see if it makes any difference. And I ended up hiring somebody to come to the house, a private phlebotomist, and she took a pint of blood out of me. And I came straight back to life again. I went from being like a zombie on the sofa, and literally as soon as that blood started coming out, I was able to talk normally. I've written a very long blog post all about, you can put the link there, and I tried to answer everybody's questions about it. And then I gave a speech last year in September, and at some point somebody said, is there anything that's helping you? And I said, I'll admit it, that I have blood taken out, and that gives me quality of life. And somebody contacted me afterwards and said, I'm an acupuncturist, and one of the things I do is an ancient form of Chinese bloodletting. Would you let me do this for you, and let's see if this helps? So I started going to her, and it's a very specific form of ancient acupuncture. And the second thing, this is a very recent discovery. So I started a trial protocol at the end of January. And again, it was after a speech I gave. A lady came up to me after the speech, and she gave me a copy of her book, and she said, I completely reset my own health 10 years ago. I nearly died, reset my health. I've studied. She's not a medical person, but she studied medicine in order to understand exactly what happened to her body. And she wrote a book, which it's not even on Amazon. It's available privately. And she gave me a copy of it, and it took me months to even get round to picking it up and to read it. And it absolutely spoke to me. The whole thing spoke to me. And it's all about the kidneys and the lymphatic system. And around that time, I'd worked out that in between the bloodletting sessions, we build up just cellular waste, don't we? Our body, whatever we're doing, me talking to you right now, my body will be using up energy, and there's waste products. And I realized that what was happening in my body was, in between the bloodletting, those waste products were building up, and somehow my body had lost the ability to get rid of that waste itself. And at the same time, I picked up this book. So it all felt a bit, the timing was quite interesting. And this book was talking about the lymphatic system, and I didn't even know what a lymphatic system was, to be quite honest with you. And as I read her book, I thought, oh my goodness, this is what's happening in my body. I'm not getting rid of these waste products. So I started a trial protocol with her. So she's been experimenting on me for a couple of months, which I'm quite happy with. And I've been on a high water content fruit and vegetable diet, because I'm always into food being medicine. Through this whole thing, I've experimented with all sorts of food-based protocols, not pharmaceutical-based protocols. So I did a high water content fruit and vegetable diet and responded unbelievably well. So the bloodletting had me functioning at 30%. And then this diet got me to, on average, it was 45%. So I'm currently at 45%, but it would have been higher, except this was the only one time in the last 2 years where I did have hope. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm fixed. I felt that amazing on this protocol. And I did 11 days of it, felt incredible, went on a hike. And I hadn't even walked anywhere in 2 years, and went on a hike and thought, I'm fine. Oh my goodness, it was right, like it was back in the early days. It was awful. But this whole process has made me look at copper. And I've just recently, just Friday, got the test results. I've come back as having copper deficiency. So I'm now going on a high copper diet. So I think those two things have been the things that have been game changers for me. Nothing else has come close. So bloodletting and a high copper diet have been game changers. And I hope that the high copper diet, I've just started a very pure copper powder. So I'm hoping that that's going to be a bit of a game changer too, and maybe take it to a different level altogether. And this trial, if any of your people are interested, then they're welcome to get in touch. She's doing another trial on people. She's specifically looking for people with long COVID or vaccine injured who want to go on this trial too.
I can pop any details if you want me to into the show notes. Yeah, that does sound really, really interesting. I think certainly what I've noticed over the last, 3 years now is that when I started off, I said this before, I'd had doctors on this kind of pedestal that, they didn't deserve, not through any fault of their own, because I'd never had any reason not to. Every time I got sick, which was hardly ever, I went to the doctor, they gave me a pill, I got better. Therefore, doctors are like the best thing ever. They're amazing. They're completely infallible. And then suddenly you get something like this where they don't know what to do. And it's interesting over the last 3 years noticing that kind of progression from doctors can fix everything to actually where I am now, where actually I'm thinking, well, all the things that have helped me have been all the things that I would have totally dismissed out of hand 3 years ago. Things like breathing and things like yoga nidra, things like cold water are all the things that I've found really useful. But 3 years ago I'd have been like, nah, that sounds like complete rubbish, give me a pill. So it's interesting how we've kind of had to search out different things. I mean, the things you've just mentioned, things that, again, 3 years ago, I'd be like, that sounds completely crazy. Whereas now it's like, well, if it works for you, that's awesome.
I totally agree. And there are people who, because I talk about this online, there are people who go on my social media specifically to talk about how mentally ill I am because I'm doing these kinds of treatments. But what my GP is fully aware, and she's interested, and I always tell her about the latest thing that I've just found out. And if they don't have anything for us, then why not go and look at all of these different things? And this is how our bodies are more in tune for those kinds of treatments than they are with pharmaceutical products. I think my GP, she did once prescribe me some iron tablets, and I had a look at those and the ingredients in there, and there was talc in them. And I looked into why would there be talc in iron tablets, and it was because talc's used to stop the machines from clogging up. Well, where is the health benefit in having talc in there? It's not. It's for making machines run so that a company will make more money. It has absolutely no health benefit whatsoever. So our bodies are made for doing all of these other things rather than the pharmaceutical products. And of course, there's going to be times when the pharmaceutical products are going to be really helpful, but should they be the go-to? Maybe this is a good opportunity to change the way that we were looking at a lot of people, how they were looking at their health anyway. I've never thought that doctors have the answers for everything. I've always thought that doctors just happen to study something different at university than I did, and they're not going to make a decision for me. There'll be people I'll go to have a conversation with so that I can look at that as an option. And I do the same thing now. I have a conversation with my GP now because I'll be interested in what the pharmaceutical industry would suggest as a way of dealing with something. And I'll look at it and I'll consider it the same way I'll look at anything else. But for this particular thing, they don't have anything. You know, what they had caused the problem. So they don't have anything to solve the problem at the moment. So of course we're going to be looking at other things.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, obviously, so long as you're doing it in a safe way, then.
But what, I mean, even that now, you know, what's going to be the safe way? How do we know what's going to be safe? Who, you know, just because one body says, okay, this is the safe way to do it, and then another body says that it doesn't, then that body might be funded by somebody, and that body, it's all very, very confusing, very messy. And you know, it's our bodies and we get to make those decisions about what we do with it and whether we think so. You know, for some people what I'm doing, they don't think that's safe at all, whereas for other people they think you should go further and do more of it. Everybody's different and we all need to have the choice really to be able to explore whatever healthcare options work for us.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah.
It's not, you know, I don't tell anyone else to go and do it. I'm not encouraging anybody else or pressuring anyone or anything, but you know, what I do with my body is up to me, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess, do you have any sort of advice to people who are early on in their journey? Not necessarily anything, medical, just, what might you say to someone who's just starting down this journey?
Oh, find a support group. Yeah, I think the people that I've met in UKCV family have been incredible, just amazing, so kind, and helpful, and just don't suffer alone at all. I thought I was the only person in the world who, in the first few weeks, and that feeling was horrible. So I'd always say to people, reach out, find your support group. Try not to get too tied up in trying to make people understand what you're dealing with, because that can really take an awful lot of energy, I think, from you. And when you realize that sure, in the long COVID community, you know, there are people around you who don't believe you and aren't interested in hearing about it, and they think, what, 2.5 years and or 3 years and you're still ill, and they, you know, they're really impatient. Don't waste your time with people like that. It's just going to be really draining. You focus on you and be really kind to yourself, really gentle. You know, that voice that we've all got in our heads that's pushing us to do more and to work harder and to go out, and you know, maybe we used to be party animals, and you know, that life that we lived before. Try not to give yourself too much of a hard time for not being able to do that right now. None of us know what the future holds. This isn't the first time for me to be sick in my life. I was very sick when I was 19, and I look at sometimes the people who are about 19, the young people who are dealing with this, and they're so scared and they think their life is over, but none of us know what's around the corner. None of us know. Life might go in a different direction, something different might happen, different people might come into it. There might be a whole different world just waiting for you. And to just try to be a bit kinder with yourself and a bit more open to what might be around the corner. You never know, you really don't.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. And yeah, I'll make sure I pop a link to your book in the show notes as well. We haven't really spoken about it, but for anyone interested in getting a copy. So yeah, thank you for all that you're doing and all the best with hopefully feeling better.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you.